Hey, everybody, it's great to see you all and connect. I am here with a good friend of mine, John Beazley, and we've got an exciting conversation for you. We're going to be talking about physical health, right? We've been in this journey of seeking healthy habits, and we've been looking at things like spiritual health and mental health, emotional health, relational health. Today, we're focusing on physical health. And when I was thinking, like, who should we talk to about physical health? John was like the first guy that came to mind. He is someone who knows a lot about this topic, and I'm excited to spend some time with him and for you to get to spend some time with him. So, John, maybe to start with, maybe just tell us a little bit about you and and kind of your journey into physical health.
Yes, first, thank you so much for having me on. It's a joy to be here, and I'm excited about just having a conversation about this. I think it's so important because a lot of people, and this is true of the Christian circles that I grew up in, like physical fitness was maybe a bit discouraged, especially if you got what would seem to be extreme. And so I think talking about this is great. So just to give a little bit of context about me, I am a certified personal trainer. I help people. I lead a company called Mind and Body. And our goal is to help people with their mental performance as well as their physical health and performance. And I absolutely love it. Did not envision myself in this type of job, though, initially, because from high school into college, I was pursuing ministry. And then after that, I traveled actually in an evangelistic ministry, speaking at different churches. But if you knew me back then, you always knew that health and fitness was always just a big deal to me. I always wanted to maximize my witness by saying, hey, I want to pursue excellence in these areas. And so when I traveled, people used to make fun of me about this, but I don't know if you've ever seen these power block dumbbells. Do you know what they are? Maybe you could like show a picture of them. It's just like an adjustable dumbbell. They were pretty state of the art. This was like 20 years ago now, but I had those power block dumbbells, and they would go from 15 to 90 pounds each. And I would carry them in our car, and I had a power block bench that could fold up. So I would take my bench and my dumbbells everywhere that we would go, unless, of course, I was flying. So first I would look for a gym. I would look for a gym, or like if a hotel had a fitness room, and a lot of hotels back then did not have fitness rooms. So I would look for a gym. If I didn't have that, I was out in the middle of nowhere, I would still have this. So I wanted to try, as I was traveling and ministering, I wanted to stay in the best shape. Because if you know this, if you travel a lot, it's very hard to stay in shape. But then the Lord began to work in our life, and we really developed the burden of seeing the gospel take root in a city. So without going into a long story, we felt God calling us into church planting, and we planted a church in Seattle. We did some pastoring in between there, so evangelism, pastoring, and then we went into planting. But a thread that's all the way through that was like, hey, I do not want to allow my health to slip. And I started to recognize when I did, there was a direct connection between my physical health and my mental well-being, and therefore also my spiritual well-being. And I think sometimes we typically can separate these things too much. Surely you can have poor health and be walking with the Lord. So I want to make sure that I'm careful there. But I do think everyone probably would admit this. The more you can give attention to your well-being holistically, the better off you're going to be in these categories. So that was one thing that I was passionate about. But maybe to give a cap to this question, there was a quote by the early church father Irenaeus that said, "The glory of God is man fully alive, or human beings fully alive." And I loved that quote. And it just shows that, hey, pursuing God's glory and my own well-being is not necessarily at odds with each other. And of course, Irenaeus meant more of the idea that, hey, Christ has come to give you life, and life more abundantly. So you're free, and it's what God has given to you is a gift of life, and it's beautiful. But I was thinking about this. I've done a lot of conversations with people who are Christian and non-Christian. And if I ask the question, do you want to feel fully alive? Everyone says yes to that. And one thing that I find is that when I can begin to help somebody with their physical well-being, they describe it in terms of like, oh, I feel energetic. I feel alive again. When people begin to eat well and they begin to steward their nutrition well, they begin to say, man, I feel alive again. I feel good. And I think this makes way for a more holistic approach of not just the physical and the mental, but also the spiritual. So I love what I do, and it's so neat to see people's lives transformed through this approach.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you're so right. I mean, integration is the key. Holistic approach to health and wellness and flourishing, I think, is ultimately the goal. And so there's such a connection between the physical and the spiritual, and how they're all intertwined. As we're embodied souls, we've got this physical flesh, right? And this is the body that God has given us, and we're to steward it to His glory and hopefully for our good. On that note, though, I'm curious. Like, the Bible talks about how, like, the body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, and how has that shaped your approach to just fitness in general? Like, like when you're thinking about it from that spiritual reality that has practical implications into real life, what does that look like?
So, like, to take a step back and look at the grand story arc of the Bible, you have in the creation narrative, God is actually doing something where He takes something that's disordered and He's creating something that's ordered. And then you go to one of the first imperatives given to mankind is to go and steward or subdue the earth, which really looks a lot like taking something that's chaotic and developing into something that has like order. And another way of thinking of it is like this whole brokenness to wholeness kind of picture. And you see this story arc through the whole Bible: chaos, order, brokenness to wholeness. And the gospel is actually designed to bring us from chaos to order, from brokenness to wholeness, right? And so if the whole story arc is moving us this direction, to me, it doesn't really make sense for us to say, hey, I'm going to allow my spiritual life is going to pursue this, but I'm going to allow my physical life to be actually in contradiction to that. Like, I'm going to allow a bunch of disorder and I'm going to allow brokenness to take place. No, that doesn't really make sense. When God says, go subdue the earth, obviously He's not being explicit about our bodies in that case, but there's this general aspect of you need to steward all of the gifts that God has given you. And when I take that subject of stewardship and I take it down a level, you see all through the Bible actually direct commands for us to steward our bodies in a certain way. So you have the general story that tells me, hey, I should be going from chaos to order, from brokenness to wholeness. But when I get to the specifics, I see, like, for instance, in 1 Corinthians, Paul says, do you not know that your body, and this is tying into what you were saying earlier, your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have of God. You are not your own, for you were bought with a price. So glorify God in your body. Now, in the context of 1 Corinthians, as you know, Bubba, he's talking about the believer's relationship to fornication. And he's saying you should flee this. Why? Because you should be glorifying God with your body. But the principle there transcends the direct application. Direct application there is about fornication. But I should be thinking about, how do I do everything in my body to glorify God? That's really the principle that's there. And I mean, we find this in other passages too. Romans 12, that we should, as a living sacrifice, we should be giving over our bodies to God as an act of worship. So what we find in Romans 12 is there's this intertwined nature of my spiritual act of worship and how I handle my body. If that makes sense. Now, I know in Romans 12, he's not saying, so go work out and eat nutrition and eat your broccoli and all that kind of stuff.
Get jacked, bro.
Yeah, get jacked, exactly. Romans 12.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, though, there is this connection of, okay, stewardship. Now God's given me specific directives to my body. So now we're kind of honing in a bit more. I'm supposed to honor God in the way that I I use my body. And then we have actual hints of the subject of exercise coming up in the scripture, where Paul will compare spiritual disciplines and results versus physical disciplines and the results of that. And a lot of times this is weaponized against physical fitness. But I think you missed the point. It's in Corinthians, or I'm sorry, 1 Timothy 4:8, where he says, "For bodily training is of some value, or it profits little. But godliness is of value in every way, as it holds promise for not just for the present life, but for the life to come." So in this passage, he's obviously saying that your spiritual discipline, your spiritual life is more important. Why? Because your physical life is temporal. Your spiritual life is going to be eternal. So he's not saying physical life not important, spiritual life is important. That's where a lot of Christians have landed, unfortunately. He's saying this one has more value because it's eternal. This one also has value, but we also need to make sure that we have it in the right parameters. So I think a good Christian worldview does maintain my spiritual life is the zenith. It's the most important. That's what I'm orienting everything around. But I can shortcut my own spiritual life if I don't maintain good spiritual or good physical health. And you find just through the scriptures, it's like sprinkled or salt and peppered all throughout the scriptures, where Paul is drawing upon physical disciplines to be analogous for, hey, this is how you should be in the spiritual life. He takes a runner, takes an athlete. I mean, he even said in 1 Corinthians 9, he says, "Do we not know that in a race all runners run, but only one receives the prize? So we run that we may obtain." And then he says, "Every athlete exercises self-control in all things." Now, notice he never dogs on the athletes doing this. He's never saying, don't do that, but you should have that characteristic in your spiritual life. No, he's saying, you see that? That's good. You should pursue that same kind of good in your own spiritual life. So I think if we look at the whole scripture witness, we see that we should be stewarding our physical life and our spiritual life, but keeping in context that the value of the physical only is as good as it serves my being rightly ordered towards God, a spiritual life. And I think this ties to the whole Augustine principle, the ordo amoris, the order of loves idea, where it's obviously there is this tendency, and we see this in our culture, where the body is worshipped. Get the physique, be super ripped. Hey, this is how you're gonna go up in status. Well, if that's what you're trying to do, then you're still in the broken category. You're using something good, but now it's disordered. And what can happen is we could say, well, since there's disorder, let's not pursue the good. No, that's the wrong idea. You still should pursue the good, but you just want to make sure that it's ordered. I'm doing this to love God rather than I'm doing this to change my status and to elevate myself and to pursue the whatever American dream or whatever you want to call it. So it's having it in the right order, but it's very important. One other note that I would give on 1 Corinthians 4, you got to think about the context of the people to whom these passages are written to, because today it's pretty common for us to have a step goal, right? Hey, I'm going to try to get 8 to 10,000 steps a day. Bubba, I don't know if you have a goal like that, if you shoot for that, but a lot of people do. Maybe you're like, oh man, I should start putting this into my life. But we now today live a very sedentary life. We just sit and do most things. But in that culture, 10,000 steps a day, that's they would laugh at that. They would walk everywhere to do everything. So the profitability of exercise in that culture would probably be even less. But I would say more so today, we need more exercise, just because most of us are just very inactive. We don't get a lot of steps in, and it's affecting how we serve others and serve Jesus.
Yeah. Well, on that note, so if somebody's really busy and maybe they don't have as active of a lifestyle as they might want, what are some ways they can prioritize their physical health? What are some practical ways they could prioritize?
Start crazy, stupid small with the goal. Seriously, I would say maybe the first thing you would do is like in your morning routine, like just try to say, I'm going to do 5 minutes of exercise and I'm going to try to nail that 3 times a week. And that's it. Do not try to set like this crazy goal. Like, I mean, people do this in all other areas. Like people go start a business and before they know they can sell anything, they like, I'm going to build a website. I'm going to come up with my color palette. I'm going to come up with my branding, and they do all this kind of stuff. And then before you know it, they've never really actually had a proof of concept and they burn out. Well, people will like go out and get a gym. They'll buy all this clothes. And it's like, whoa. Just start where you are. Start really small. It's fine to dream big, but you want to actually think small when it comes to your next steps. And I think James Clear, in his Atomic Habit book, really emphasizes make it easy and try to remove as much friction as possible. So you want to think through how can I make it easy? And then also, what can I do the day before to set myself up to win? And a lot of times people struggle with getting into a new habit because they haven't really had a plan and they haven't thought through, where do I place this? Because you can't eternally add things to your life. I mean, if you're going to add some things, you're going to have to cut certain things, right? And I think if you think through that a little bit more, it can be helpful. But I would say really start small. The truth is a little bit of work that's quality is going to begin to change your body. And then you can think of, okay, and this is what I do with my clients. We'll do for the first week. I'll say, I want you just to train and I want you to get used to tracking your nutrition. And I tell them, it doesn't matter what you eat in your nutrition. I don't want you to even try to nail your macros yet. I just want you to track it. If you go to Dunkin' Donuts, like write that down. I want you to become aware. Awareness in any discipline is the beginning of change. If you're not aware of what you're doing, you can't change it, really. So you become aware, and then you just get into the rhythm of, hey, I'm hitting these exercises that I have planned out. And then after that, we begin to expand upon that in a way that makes sense for their rhythm of life.
Do you ever find that as people are trying to get into this habit of discipline, that there's a struggle with, maybe becoming legalistic in it, or if they don't actually work out, then they feel like guilt and shame. So like, how does someone balance, they're like, I want to have self-discipline, but balance that with grace and avoid, the traps of legalism or guilt or shame?
Yes. That's a really good question. So different personality types tend to have different proclivities, right? So you have some people who have the proclivity to be too self-compassionate. They never they don't have a bias towards action. They're just like, oh, I just feel bad today. I feel sick. I'm taking a day off. It's a mental health day. And it's like, oh, this is day 5 of mental health day for me, and they probably need a little bit more bias towards action. They need to learn to say, you know what? Life is difficult. I still need to move towards action. So my advice for them would be different. But there are other people who have a bias towards discipline. And if they don't nail it, they're like all or nothing. And if they're not nailing it, they get really frustrated. And they tie like, I did these disciplines. I had these in my life. I should be getting this outcome. And so they get to the end of the week and they check the outcomes, like how much weight did they lose or whatever, and they can get really discouraged. And so it depends on the personality type, I think. But for someone who leans towards burnout because of legalism, they become like, I have to nail this perfectly. What I try to encourage is saying, hey, you're bent towards action, you're biased towards action. That's good. When you evaluate your days, your weeks, or whatever, and your outcomes, I want you to not start with a negative bias. Negative bias never leads to a growth outcome. Matter of fact, negative bias tends to really disrupt somebody. I had this quote I was going to share, but I don't know if I can pull it up here. Here it is. I had it written down. It's a negative bias sees failure as a proof of inadequacy, while a growth mindset sees it as a step towards mastery. I heard this quote. It's from, I think, a business guy, but one guy came up to him, and this sounds a little snarky, but I think you'll get what I'm saying. The guy said, like, how come you're so successful in life? And the business guy says, well, I was willing to fail more times than you were willing to attempt the thing. And I think what he was getting at was our view towards failure will have a huge impact on whether or not we're successful. And what I mean by that is if we say failure is a key ingredient to my success, it's not failure or success. It is success through failure. But I have a growth mindset that's willing to say, hey, this is what I did this week. This is what I did well. This is where I struggled. Let me see if I can make one easy change this week. And if I keep making these one changes each week, it's going to have a compounding effect. But what I'll say with this, with somebody who tends towards legalism, is I'll say it's okay to have that bias towards action. But when you're evaluating, instead of starting with a negative bias, start with gratitude. Like, look at your life and say, wow, look what I was able to do this week. Look how when I was really super tired, I actually went into the gym. I didn't even finish my workout, but I did some of my workout. I would never have done that in the past. And but when you're doing that, you may not know this, but what you're doing is you're developing self-compassion in the context of being biased towards action. That's discipline. So you see the rhythm there, bias towards action, but I'm also cultivating self-compassion at the same time through rather having a negative bias. I have a bias towards gratitude and thankfulness, which are very Christian impulses and intuitions that we should have.
Yeah, totally.
One of the Proverbs says, the just man falls 7 times and rises up again. So it like implied in that's obviously in a spiritual context. This is an ancient Japanese proverb that has kind of the same lines. Like a man falls 7, but rises the 8th, I think is the Japanese proverb. And basically saying like, hey, this is baked into success that you're going to experience failure. But the more times that you can just say, I'm going to attempt and fail, but have a growth mindset, I'm going to keep trying to learn from the data of failure, I think you're going to do great. So I'm sure there could be more to be said to that point, but hopefully that gives somebody something to think through.
I think that's really helpful because I think so often when someone is trying to cultivate a new habit, and it doesn't matter what it is, right? It could be whether it's, journaling or studying the Bible or, exercising, whatever it is. So often when they don't meet their own expectation or what they think they're supposed to do, right? If maybe it's a self-imposed expectation that they borrowed from someone else. As soon as failure happens, so often it's like, I should just quit. I should give up, right? I just failed. Like, what's the use? And I think that's true of any habit. It's especially true though of like when working out, right? You're like, I just, the only curl I'm doing is the donut to my mouth, right? So they're like, I should just give up, and it's like, no. So I love that idea of just like, no, we fail forward, right? This is a part of the journey. You'll have days where you don't do as well, and that's okay. It's really about a forward trajectory.
Yeah, I like that. And even like when you're oriented towards God in your spiritual life, instead of looking at God in heaven, every time you fail, like God's in heaven, like, you're such a screw up. Like, I hope you get your life together. I hope you really mean surrender this time. But if we look at it as more of like the whole story of the gospel was God stepped into the mess.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus is our sympathetic high priest. And on our worst day, we're able to come boldly to the throne of grace to obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need. So I don't come boldly to the throne like just when I'm nailing it, but that's actually when I'm actually a screw up spiritually. The Bible is saying if your orientation towards God is, I got to clean up first before I can actually be bold. It's like, you got the gospel all wrong.
Right.
And I think that orientation could sprinkle into and influence how we think about our physical goals as well. I think we can learn from those things. One thing I like to do too, in the Gospel of John, Jesus looks at his disciples, like it's John 6. And there was a lot of people like fascinated by his miracles. But in John 6, a lot of people turned away and never followed him again. So it actually says like some of his like disciples, not the 12, but some of the disciples that were following him just decided to follow him no more. Jesus turns to the 12 and says, will you also go away? And I think it was Peter, but one of the disciples says, where would we go? Like, you're the source of eternal life. And I think there's an important point that we can draw from this. Sometimes we get discouraged about life, and I'm sure the disciples were like, whoa, what was Jesus talking about? Eating his blood and, eating his body, drinking his blood. This is weird stuff. A lot of people are just, they don't feel like this is a good message. This wasn't your best sermon, Jesus, or whatever. They're trying to figure this out. But at the end of the day, they're like, there is no alternative. And what I like to help people kind of back up, and I don't do this if they're really down, because this could be a poor timing issue. But I like to say, what would be the alternative if you did just decide, I'm no longer going to pursue health. I'm no longer going to pursue eating as trying to learn nutrition or trying to exercise my body towards being in a better shape. What's the alternative? And they start to realize, oh, there really isn't an alternative. Like, this is the path towards mastery. This is the path towards me actually stewarding my life fully. And it just like the disciples realize, oh man, this is hard, but it's much harder walking away from Jesus because he is the one who has life. Does that make sense? Do you see like the parallel I'm trying to draw? But I do think one thing that I think is important that I'll add to this as well is creating good time horizons for your goals and expectations. This is what I see happen often. People want to see change, and they think that they can reverse a decade of poor decision making, like with diet and no training and a sedentary life, that they could reverse, a decade of that with a 12-week program. They feel like, I'll do this 12-week program, I'll lose the weight, and I'll get everything back in order. Now, you can see some amazing changes in just weeks of training. You can. But I think you have to learn to set your expectations. I was listening to this guy who was I think a psychologist, but he said, if somebody came to you after 4 lessons of learning Latin and they said, duh, I haven't mastered the language yet, you'd probably be like, bro, like chill, like 4 lessons. I mean, no one learns the language in 4 lessons. His expectation wasn't set right to the task. And I think developing a bigger time horizon here and saying, hey, you know what? If I need to lose more than 50 pounds and I have some injuries that I'm working around, it might take me a year or 2 years to get to the goal that I want to get to. But if you set that, it makes it so much easier. Like the psychological weight is not as heavy as opposed to saying, I'm going to try to get all this fixed in the next 12 weeks, if that makes sense. So anyways, hopefully there's some things to take away from that would be helpful.
Totally. So, what do you say? What do you say if someone's discouraged and they're feeling like they're really struggling to either get started or to continue or whatever? How do you usually minister to someone when they're in that spot?
So as a coach, one thing that I try to do is when a client comes in, a lot of people, I think this is an experience. We feel pretty tired. And when you're going to meet with a coach, you pretty much are confronted with what you didn't do that week a lot of times. And so when they come in, I try to really make over, like, look what you did here. Hey, you got 2 of the workouts in this week, as opposed to like the week before, maybe they only hit 1. And this week, hey, you got 2. That was an improvement. And I try to find the ways in which they improved. And in some ways I've had people like, hey, I missed my workout this morning because, man, I just didn't sleep well. My kids were up. And I was like, hey, way to listen to your body. You probably needed the rest. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes people feeling like, hey, when you can give grace and you can show sympathy and care, I think it kind of helps people kind of like, oh, hey. And matter of fact, normally when somebody comes in with the weight of like, my coach is going to destroy me because I didn't do everything. But then like, hey, this is okay. You missed this. Look how the improvement. Hey, even though you went over in your calories, we're still tracking towards losing weight, something along those lines. It can release them to like pursue what they're pursuing courageously. They feel like, oh, the weight's gone. I have somebody that's cheering me on. And this is the power, I think, of people surrounding themselves with people that are going to cheer them on. The environment that you put yourself in has a lot to do with your success or ability to move forward. This is why I think church is such a powerful, obviously it was, created by God, but it's a powerful means to pursue spiritual growth, but it's also a powerful means for us just to pursue well-being as a whole, because we have people encouraging us on. The more we isolate ourselves from that, the more discouraged, the more mental health problems there can be. But I normally try to start to kind of come full circle. I try to start saying, let's celebrate the wins, even if it's small, we try to celebrate those wins. But then we just refocus, and then we try to start small. And sometimes we realize, I tell clients this all the time, when you're not hitting a key discipline and you keep missing that key discipline, you either need to come to a confrontation of yourself and to say, why am I not hitting that discipline? Like, what's the reason? What is the hang up? And kind of like dissect that for a little bit to try to figure out why you're not doing it. It might be that you've overscheduled yourself. You're not a bad person. You're not undisciplined. You're just overworked, overscheduled. And so I either say you confront the lack of discipline, or you change your expectations. You're like, you know what? I started off saying I was going to do an hour workout 5 days a week. And I found out that that's just actually not doable for me in this time of life. That's totally fine. Instead of beating yourself up, let's reset the expectation to be doable for you, but also still moving us towards the goal. And this is good for relationships. A lot of relationship struggles tend to be in the area of mismatched expectations. But when it comes to business, life, fitness, spiritual growth, expectations plays a huge part in our own self-regulation.
What would you say? So, okay, we'll do a hypothetical. Mm-hmm. So let's pretend I'm a person who I don't have a coach. Okay. And I'm wanting to make some movement towards greater physical health, but I just struggle with a lot of, say, self-condemnation. I'm just constantly beating myself up internally. What's going on in my mind is, it's like a repeating, tape that just over and over. You can't do it. You'll never be able to do it. Why? You should just don't even try. How does the gospel make a difference for me? How does Jesus make a difference for me? How does the Spirit make a difference for me?
Yes. So, man, we are all so very good at self-sabotage, but there definitely are people who have like a bias towards always kind of self-destructive talk. And what I find interesting in like Romans, for instance, Romans chapter 6, to use the gospel, the Romans were struggling with particular types of sins. And Paul starts this chapter, Romans 6, he says, what, shall you continue in sin that grace may abound? And he's like, may it never be. And then he goes on to say, and it's interesting what he says next. He says, you shouldn't continue in sin. May this never be. What does he say next? Does he say, because there's a consequence for sin? Or, there's a number of things he could have put there for sure. But what he does is he actually applies their gospel identity to their current way of living. He says, you shouldn't continue in sin. May this never be the case. How shall you who have died to sin live any longer therein? And what I find interesting is that his whole premise in Romans 6 is like, you shouldn't continue this way because you have died to sin. And the language there is, this has already occurred. Yeah, I mean, you're dead to sin. And then he goes on to say, you've been united to Christ, and therefore you're united with his resurrection. So what's true about Jesus is true about you. He's victorious, you're victorious. You know, he died for sins, you died unto sin, and now you've experienced his life and freedom. And a big part of the Christian life is actually being able to bring down that truth about you into how you think about your life. So when you sin, if you start off with saying, oh, that's just who I am, I'm just a wretched person, I just keep failing. At that moment, you have failed to embrace the gospel identity that you have. And one of the ways to start doing this is to learn to refrain your way of thinking by saying, instead of saying, and you don't want to go the other direction that says, oh, I didn't sin. That's like not taking ownership, right? Like if you messed up, you should take ownership. But it's kind of like, oh, you know what? That's not me. I'm dead to sin. I'm alive in a God. I'm free to live victoriously. In the psychological literature, they'll use the idea of like learning to give yourself affirmations, right? And they'll say, hey, you need to start like talking to yourself better. They call it self-talk. The problem with affirmations is sometimes they can actually feel like it's just like you're lying to yourself. Like if you look in the mirror, like, I'm a strong person and I never fail. In the back of your head says, you did today. You'll probably do it in an hour. I mean, you're going to get in the car and go to the Dunkin' Donuts. You already know that. And that can plague into saying affirmations don't really work that well. But when you begin to actually have one or two wins and you start the cycle of Thanksgiving, you begin to say, oh, look, I did win over here. I didn't win over here. That's stacking proof. Now my affirmations, I can look at the proof and be able to say, hey, look, there's the stack of proof. I'm becoming the person that I say that I am. Now, from a Christian perspective, what we have that's better is that Christ already stacked the proof for us. Like it's not me going out and manifesting. The whole gospel narrative is not you earning your place, of righteousness before God. You've received it. Salvation is not something that you earn, right? It's something that's a gift. Mm-hmm. And I think when you can come from this position, when you always are self-sabotaging yourself, you're not embracing the gospel. But you can take this gospel confidence and say, hey, how does this affect how I pursue stewarding all of my life? Like, surely you can take like, hey, I'm a child of God. I am loved. I am secure in him. You can take this truth and allow it to impact your psychology and others areas. It's like, how can I in one mouth say, I'm secure in Christ. I'm loved of God. And at the same time say, I'm a no good. I can't discipline myself. There's a disconnect here. And if you can become aware of it and begin to say, hey, I'm going to allow this identity to actually impact every aspect of me, my physical life, mental life, spiritual life, you will find a newfound confidence that's better than what the world can provide. The world can provide like self-talk that's based on, your own success, right? But a Christian can go further and say, I have gospel hope that anchors me deeper. And sure, having your own success and stacking that's not a bad thing. That's good too. But in the end, all that pales and actually fails. We're anchored to Christ.
Yeah, it's so true. So good. What's interesting is I'm going to reflect a little bit on our conversation we're having because I didn't consider this before we started this conversation, but so much of this conversation, even though we're talking about physical health, is really about our what's going on in the mind, right? It's like, seeing ourselves in Christ, seeing ourselves as a worshiper unto God, stewarding our bodies in a way to honoring God, that so much of our physical health really is connected to where our heart is, where our mind is, and how we're relationally interacting with God. And I think that's just worth noting that, that's just so important. That's such an important part of physical health for Christians.
Yes. it was, I think it was Augustine that said, yeah, like before Augustine became a Christian, he was a what would be called now like Neoplatonist. So they believed that the whole chief end is to be united to the one, and the one was like the logos. It was undefined a little bit, but they would have this phrase. They're like, the goal is for me to become one with self and one with reality. Now, I really like that. Augustine took that and says, how do we look at that through a Christian lens? And he says, oh, I do want to pursue oneness or wholeness of self, but that comes through rightly orienting myself to reality, and that ultimate reality is God. And I think you're saying the same thing. And I think of this often, like a lot of the reason I stumble and bumble around in this life is because there's a division, there's brokenness within, there's not wholeness. And I need to learn to come to like that oneness within, and also syncing with reality. And that's the reality of God. And if I can do that, it orients me correctly in how I move about the world. But a lot of people, they never fix that. So their interaction in the world still feels fractured and broken, as opposed to, I know who I am. I know who God's created me to be. I know how to embrace that identity when I feel like I want to self-sabotage. And that goes back to that mental practice. And my goodness, the Bible is replete with like, don't be conformed to the present age, but be transformed by what? Like the recalibration or the renewing of your mind. Like, don't think this way, but think according to what is true, honest, just, pure, lovely, Philippians 4:8. There's other passages, but being able to master mind. And this is actually why I started Mind and Body. I didn't want to start something that was just like, hey, let me help you get in shape. It was like, there's a correlation between the mind and the body. In science, there's a mystery to that, but science is actually getting closer and closer, particularly neuroscience, on the direct connection. I mean, I could just prove it to you easily with just saying, when you don't eat for hours, does it affect the way that you think, the way that you behave? There's the term hangry, right? Like, why are you so like angry? Well, I haven't eaten in a while. There's a gut-brain connection. And matter of fact, when you start eating like good nutrition, the nutrition in your gut actually can send signals to your brain to change even the chemical responses to how you view life. So there's that gut, and I can give you some resources too later. There's several books out there that relates to. Let me see if I can grab the title. It's called the Mind Gut Connection by Mayer. I'll send you a link. It might be a little bit heady for what most people would want to see, but if you're like to nerd out, there's a lot of ways like when you get anxious or you get stressed and you feel a disruption in your stomach, you might describe it as like I have butterflies in my stomach type of thing. Well, it's your brain sending signals to your gut, and there's times where your gut sends signals to your brain. And so the more that you can work on your physical nutrition and your mental, the way that you think about things. And there's plenty of things in science called like neuroplasticity, which is the ability to actually change the way that you think. We think the way that we think because we do the things that we do. And a lot of times, if we can begin to actually start to change our actions and change the way that we talk about those actions, new pathways are created in the brain. So you used to think a certain way, and you may say, this is the way that I am. No, this is the way you've become. But you can change that. Science proves that. And the gospel shows us that we can change. And so with science and also theology, which I think I've been studying this recently. Forgive me for kind of nerding out here just a bit, but like it was Thomas Aquinas that there was this big disparity between science, the scientific revolution beginning to build some momentum, and the church. And the church was saying we should keep scientific truth and religious truth separate. And Thomas Aquinas was like, no, I don't think that's a good impulse. That's like separating, he didn't use these terms, but separating general revelation from specific revelation. He says, instead of trying to separate these two, we should work hard enough to see how they unite. And he began to just show that there's no reason why we should have the tension between science and religion. And I love, as a pastor, and I seek to be, I guess, a theologian of some kind, but at the same time I'm studying the science and I'm looking at the psychology and I'm trying to study health. To see how these connect on so many levels is mind-blowing and fascinating. So anyways, thanks for my digression, or allowing my digression there.
Okay, so let me ask. We're coming close to the end of our time, so let me just ask you, if you were to summarize, what's the most important thing to really think about or be focused on for someone pursuing physical health? How would you summarize that? What would you tell them?
So when I'm helping a client, I try to help instill 8 rhythms of well-being, and here are the 8. And I'll give them to you real quick, and then I'll tell you where I would place my emphasis. So the 8 rhythms of well-being. So first is, you can say, training and exercise. This is like the big domino that if I start doing it, it's going to change everything. And the reason why I say that is because when I put demands on my body, whether you're running, and you can pick whatever form of exercise you like. If you like to run, you like to do high intensity interval training, you like to hit the gym, you like powerlifting, you like to do yoga, whatever it is, okay? But you do that exercise. When you do that, you're putting in your body in a position where it has to adapt. So your body's going to signal for nutrition. It's going to actually want to have good nutrition so that it can recover and then also rebuild. So you get the training in place. It's the big domino that begins for your body to crave the necessary nutrition. When you do training and nutrition right, you sleep better, which ends up helping you train better, which causes you to want more healthy foods, which causes you to sleep better. And once you get the big 3, and what I try to help my clients is let's get these big 3 things in a clear cycle: training, feeding well, sleeping well. And I'm telling you, most of the problems are going to be fixed from those 3 disciplines. But so first thing is training. Second is I want to dial in their nutrition. And again, I can start really, really simple with that. What I like to do is say, don't disrupt your whole diet. Don't try to start something brand new and say, all right, chicken, broccoli, and rice. That's all I'm eating. You won't. It's not sustainable. The better thing is find out what do you like to eat. But let's tweak your macronutrients. So let's make sure you're getting enough proteins to build muscle. Let's make sure you're getting enough healthy carbs and fats. Let's balance that out. And by the way, and I wouldn't mind if any of your church members who are hearing this, if they would I do free consultations. So if you ever I can't pay for coaching, but I'd love to talk to an expert in this field. I would love to help you get set up with your nutrition and set you on the right path. If you ever need help, I'll give you my link. You can.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So you got training, you got nutrition. Third thing is sleep. I try to help set up a sleep protocol, particularly around getting towards sleep at night. It's not just go to bed at this time. It's a protocol that's going to help wind down your mind so that you get good sleep, so you hit that deep sleep sooner. Fourth, hydration, which all metabolic processes, it's going to be important that you just stay hydrated. Doesn't mean it has to all be just water. Actually, everything that you drink is hydrating you. By the way, even soda or coffee is a part of hydrating you, though I wouldn't recommend it with the soda side because of the sugar. It can be excess. Yeah. But just so you know, it does play a part in hydrating you. The fifth thing is, the next 2 things have to do with almost like your psychology, but nature. The other thing is mindfulness. The 7th thing is accountability and education. Let me say it more succinctly: training, nutrition, sleep, hydration, nature, mindfulness, accountability, and education. So this is how this works. I already described the first 3: training, nutrition, and sleep, and hydration. Nature, the verse in Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God. And there's something about being exposed to God's general revelation in nature that resets us. And the Psalm actually says as much. Science actually shows that when we're able to get out and get good early morning sun exposure, we're able to get fresh air. When we're getting out in nature, it has a way of recalibrating our minds, but it also has physiological changes as well. So I try to encourage, like, let's get a rhythm of training, nutrition, sleep. Let's try to have good hydration through the day. Let's try to be touching in with nature throughout the week. And Christians have a good basis for that as well. Mindfulness is a rhythm of self-reflection. And I think Christians with a daily time with God, there should be a time of, yes, reading scripture, praying, but I think maybe even intentionally thinking more deeply about you, like know you. This is a part of the process as well. And then good accountability. It doesn't have to be a coach. It could be something at the church. Like I'm seeing churches now doing kind of groups around like just well-being, including fitness and nutrition, and just like, hey, how you doing? How are things going? If you show up every week and you just keep feeling like, oh man, I didn't, I didn't nail my nutrition this week. I didn't nail my nutrition this week. I didn't nail my nutrition this week. After a while, you're like, I want to nail 1 week. I mean, it's going to kind of play on that psychology. Good accountability. And the last part is this education front. And this is just a general growth mindset. I'm going to continue to grow in my knowledge of what it looks like to be a healthy human being. I'm going to grow in my knowledge of what it looks like to pursue well-being. And if you can get these, and I call them rhythms, because it's not like you just do them for 12 weeks and you're done. It's like for the rest of my life, to the best of my ability, I'm going to try to do some form of exercise. And if you're disabled, you have to figure out like what would that look like for me. And maybe that's I'm going to try to get up and move around as best that I can. But you're setting a goal, right? And even if it's small, remember that small 5-minute goal. That's great. And if you can do these 8 rhythms, incorporating them. Last thing I'll say about this is when I'm dealing with a client, we actually don't try to do all 8 at one time, like starting. I start off with that. Remember the track and train. So it's like, I want you to train. I want you to track your nutrition. Let's do this for a while. And then it's like, okay, now let's refine the nutrition that you're getting. Now let's talk about your sleep. And normally towards the end of a training regimen, I'm actually leading someone towards a recovery week. And we try to dial in their sleep even more. And we talk about sleep protocols. And I try to layer these. So if you're listening in, don't get overwhelmed with trying to do all of this at once, but maybe try to take these 8 and say, hey, how am I doing my training, nutrition, sleep? How can I make a tweak to that? And the tweak for sleep might be, I'm going to lessen my blue light exposure an hour before I go to sleep. So I'm not going to watch TV right up to I sleep. An hour before I go to sleep, I'm going to limit to no phones, tablets, or computer screens or TV screens. This actually helps your brain unwind so that you can sleep well. So these are some things that I would try to set in place.
Man, that's fantastic. I really appreciate you. I appreciate you taking the time to share your wisdom. And obviously you just kind of like, this kind of like flows out of you. It's so a part of you. It's so easy to see that, which is inspirational. If somebody wants to connect with you, right? Like you mentioned that free consultation or something like that, like what's the best way for them to do that if somebody's interested in connecting with you?
Yeah, so I can definitely give you like all the connections through, like I can give you like my email would probably be the best thing. I'm on social media too. And so if you message me through like Facebook or Instagram, I can give you that too. If you're on social media, feel free to hit me up. Also, since I mentioned it too, I have a link that I can send you that you could book a call. I also have a website that I'm actually just changing. So if you clicked on it today, of course, I know that you might be sharing this later, so this should be fine. But I'm updating some of the things on my website at the moment. But I do have a website that is mindandbodystrength.com.
Okay.
So mindandbodystrength.com. And there's a place where you can send me over an email from there if that's the best place to contact me. There's also a form there that you could book a call as well.
Sweet. Thank you so much, John. Appreciate you, buddy.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on.